Hi Mike, welcome to my classroom. As you know, I'm here to show you how I plan and prepare to get the third graders college and career ready, and most importantly ready for fourth grade. As we all know, our planning starts with the district and state standards, and it also starts here in the classroom with the kids. So grab some popcorn, sit back, and enjoy the show. When I begin planning any unit, I always want to start with long-range plans, which starts with New York Learns, where our state standards and district standards are located. Once I'm in New York Learns, I like to take a look at what the standards are, what skills we are covering. Also in New York Learns, the resources that are available to me to use for tools to help me teach. And finally, I like to take a peek at how long this unit should take me so I can plan long term and try to stay on pace. This is available to me through science and math as far as the pacing is concerned. For ELA, I have to do something different. For reading and writing, I open up our year at a glance for grades 3 through 5. And that allows me to check to see what I need to teach for reading and writing and when I need to be teaching it, and the resources that we should be using to help us do that. So for example, in September, I should be doing our narrative through October and using the book Raising the Quality of Narrative Writing by Lucy Calkins. After I go through the New York Learns documents and looking at our year at a glance, I then take this one step further to help me stay on track. After I use New York Learns to help me with the standards I'm teaching and the content, I then help myself with the pacing and long-range planning by plugging it into iCal, which is a calendar that I use, which syncs with my iPad and my iPhone. I can also access it from the internet. So for example, I'm going to be starting life science on December 10th in realistic fiction writing, using the guidelines from New York Learns and the pacing. And then I plug in approximately my goals for wanting to finish based on how long it should take me to teach. And again, this is always subject to change, because from here I then go ahead and look at the units themselves, especially in the content areas, to make some teacher judgments as to what I want to add or what I might want to take away, but always following the standards and the essentials of what need to be taught. After I have my long-range goals in mind, before I begin teaching a unit, most especially before a unit that I have never taught before, using resources I've never used before, I want to take the time to go through those resources from beginning to end. Sometimes I'll read through the whole thing. Sometimes that is virtually impossible, especially this year based on how many new resources we have this year and the amount of reading we have to do to complete it. I'll start off by looking at the overview, especially with Lucy Calkins. After I take a good look at the unit overview, and then peruse 3 to 5 chapters ahead of time and reading it, looking at what the goals are and the teaching points are, especially for a new unit, I then create an outline for myself to try to combine some of my own style with the teaching points or lessons that the students need to learn. This helps me filter out some of the learning. It also helps me put it in my own words, in my own language, and in the best way I know how to teach it. It also prevents me from having to read from the book all of the time. So as you can see, I'm using the same teaching points as Lucy Calkins is, and very similar activities. However, again, I am trying to pare it down to my own style. And notes to help my guide my teaching. Whenever I plan for a unit or a lesson, I always want to incorporate activating their schema. I incorporate vocabulary for content and academic vocabulary. I always incorporate reading and writing skills, as well as creating skill-based activities that are hands-on. The language skills during our science, social studies, and math help incorporate our ELA during those times. After the outline of my unit plan is complete, I then want to fine-tune my plans based on the needs of the students. Due to the fact that students come to us with different background knowledge, with different experiences and learning styles, this is where we want to be as creative as we can to provide each child with the best type of learning experience. As a teacher, when I look at my plans, I always want to ask myself, who's doing more work here, me or the students? The plans need to reflect student engagement and student interaction with whatever reading or activity they're doing. One way I choose and design activities is by the learning styles of students. So I try to create activities that include song. I try to find movies, and sometimes we just do straightforward note-taking. I also pay attention to the background knowledge of the students. So in order to understand what they already know about a topic, I sometimes will give a quick KWL, or for example, I might do a quick pre-assessment on continents and oceans. This allows me to plan appropriately for groupings where I can plan extension activities for children who already know the essentials and remedial activities for children who are seriously lacking in a content area. Due to the fact that we do so much more reading in the content areas such as science and social studies, I will often use the children's reading abilities to group for science, especially if we are reading in the content areas, as well as their writing abilities. For example, I'm combining reading lessons with our science text, and this week we're focusing on main idea. So I'm using the information from the F&Ps. I'm using information from their individual reading and writing conferences to help me determine how I want to group the children in science and to help me determine the level of support that I'm going to offer them for their reading. This also helps me determine the kinds of activities I want to do with the kids and how to differentiate those activities. Therefore, my next step is to utilize resources or to find resources that are going to be useful for me to create engaging activities that are appropriate for all learning abilities in the classroom, and that also will help us reach the goals of meeting the Common Core learning standards. One of the resources that I'm using much more is Engage New York. I have discovered some protocols on Engage New York, and I've also discovered videos to help with the teaching of the newer strategies such as close reading and teaching academic vocabulary. In front of me are quite a few of my go-to resources that I use quite frequently. The first being Strategies That Work, which you are familiar with. This is used to teach different kinds of thinking strategies to the students, and I find them to be very productive, useful activities to help children learn how to think during reading. The next resource is called Nonfiction in Focus, and this is a great resource to use to help children learn how to read nonfiction, especially understand how nonfiction reading is organized when you're comparing, contrasting, cause and effect. I use a lot of these lessons during our science and social studies reading. This particular sheet is an example of how I incorporate writing in the content areas. I have increased the amount of writing they do in the content areas a great deal this year. It's a wonderful way to teach the organization of writing, such as compare, contrast, cause, effect, This particular sheet was practicing descriptive writing. So we start out by, first I teach the students signal words, and that's introduced in reading. So we've been practicing signal words in reading for description for quite a while, and now we're going to use them in writing. And their writing also obviously comes from the text that they read. We incorporate paragraph skills, and I give them reminders just as they would see on the New York State test as to things that they need to include. So their task was to create 4 paragraphs about adaptations that include an introduction, paragraph details based on what they learned. They also were required to put their learning in their own words. And the last requirement was for them to use appropriate content vocabulary, in this case science. Another resource I use is called Bringing Words to Life. And this resource is used to help me introduce and teach academic vocabulary to the students. And I do this before teaching each unit or a set of lessons. So first I go through the science text or the social studies text, and I find words that I feel they would need support in to strengthen their comprehension of the text. Then I go through and I actually write the definitions for them. But the definitions are written in kid-friendly terms, as kid-friendly as I can get. I also like to choose words that I know they're going to see over and over again. So for instance, system is also going to be introduced and used when they learn about plant systems. So a system, a set of parts working together, is a definition. And then I will give samples of what would be an example of a system. So I did that for them, and then some they did with me. The reason why we do the examples is to be able to attach what they already know. So they already know that their body parts work together. And it's explained in a way that, again, they are going to be able to understand. And then what I allow them to do is do a quick sketch for each word. I find that the sketches really help the kids with their understanding and recall. So for example, this young girl drew a sketch of Wegmans. And that was when we were learning about products. So products, things we make and sell, or to sell and buy. What are some examples? Here are some examples that the children, or she was able to understand. Tomatoes, video games at GameStop. I also continue to use the John Oflahaven activities that we learned in the cohorts. I do find that his skills and activities are much more child-friendly and user-friendly for the students, so I do try my best to blend his ideas with Lucy Calkins. Another resource that I like to use a lot is called Choice Words by Peter Johnston. This was introduced to us in the John Oflahaven workshops as well. This book is a great tool for teachers to use, really forcing us to pay attention to the language that we use with children and the kinds of questions that are more thoughtful in producing strategic thinkers instead of just telling kids what we want them to know. Along with the professional resources that are available to us through work or that I buy, I also have been known to go on to Teachers Pay Teachers to find resources. You can actually find a lot of great ideas there. Um, I spend a lot of time Googling. For instance, I wanted some clever ways to learn how to teach kids the properties of addition and multiplication. So I Googled it and ended up finding a nifty little slideshow that was for free that I took and modified to make it my own and useful for what our kids need. Once I go through the resources, I then design and create activities that are related to the lesson's objectives. What I did here is things are marked with names. This is our science activity for next Thursday, and it's going to be a differentiated activity based on their reading groups in science. And they are going to have to identify main idea in detail. So I differentiated the activity based on how much information I give them on the organizer. And these are the kids who are going to have to fill in the complete organizer. They are better readers. These are my average readers. So I gave them a little more information on what they need to do and their names. And then these are the kids I'm going to be working with as a guided group who got even more information, where I provided them with the main idea and the other two groups did not get that. This final group of children are also my lowest readers and will then receive more support from me in order to ensure understanding of the text and to apply the main idea. Once everything is planned, I then turn them into daily and weekly plans. For the reading and writing, I write down what the reading objective is, the unit, for example, biographies, and the day we are on. I do this because it was written up more thoroughly, as you can see in the unit plan, and that's where I get the information from when I am teaching. For the math, I tend to be more thorough on the weekly plans using the math manual and other resources that I find to write down what the lesson is, the activities, how long they will take, and how I want to differentiate. For the science, I will write down the reading skill that I am combining with the science activity. And again, any kind of differentiation or modifications I'm going to make based on the learning objectives and goals. I've had to spend a lot of time this year rewriting unit plans just because of the way that we are teaching science now. One of our shifts is that the children are getting their information more from reading than they are from teacher activities. I also want to add that my lesson plans will include the mode of instruction that I'm going to use, whether we are going to be working in partners, small group, or whole group, or if I'm working with individuals. Every student has a different entry point of learning and having the ability to use higher order thinking skills. So I tried very hard to keep that in mind when I planned for the biography book clubs this year. Therefore, what I did is I asked the children after reading a selection or a chapter to take notes on 3 open-ended questions. One question being, what are you noticing? The second, what connections are you making? And the third, why is this important? And this allowed the children to be able to write down their thinking without judgment. And it also allowed me to be able to see what kinds of higher order thinking skills and what kind of connections, important connections that they're making. Again, these kinds of open-ended questions honor the students, each student's ability as far as where they are at. And it also allows me to intervene for children who might be in need of more remediation to help them dig deeper and become stronger in inferential thinking.
And it also helps me intervene with the students who need more enrichment and who might be strong at making those inferences, where I can then take that child and get them to dig deeper. I also like to use the open-ended questions because we are not boxing the children into a certain way of thinking, that we're asking them specific questions to force an answer that we want out of them. The open-ended format types of questions also allow for much better conversations within the book clubs, discussions, and it also actually makes for very good conversations between book clubs. If I find there are gaps or they are missing essential elements that I really would like them to connect with or notice, that is when I step in and talk to the book clubs and talk to the kids and try to ask some guiding questions. Due to the fact that we get a group of students that come to us with many different backgrounds and learning experiences, it's important for us to incorporate as many different kinds of learning strategies as we can to try to meet the needs of all learners. One of the ways that I attempt to do this is by utilizing as many different types of resources as I showed you earlier on. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the use of the library and the amount of books that I do take out for the students so they have multiple sources to read from, as well as creating my own resource lists for content and concepts that I teach, books that I use, mentor books that I use that work well for different types of genres. With that said, one of the most effective approaches I've used thus far this year was the use of iPads within the classroom. The iPads were a wonderful way for the students to create, explore, and use a process of inquiry in order to learn in all academic areas. When we got the iPads, the focus changed from the teacher teaching the students to the students teaching the students. The children practiced math. They were able to read and get immediate feedback on their reading. They also completed graphic organizers. They spent a lot of time collaborating with each other, and a lot of this was self-determined collaboration. And they also wrote. One of the impacts that the iPads had on their writing was their ability to produce. The children were in the process of writing essays, and this is the first time in a very long time I have seen children write draft after draft after draft. And as a teacher, sometimes the process of writing is more important than the product. Also, it helped struggling writers produce and write much more and changed their attitude towards writing in the classroom. Using technology in the classroom was not only motivating for the students, but it also allowed me to meet more frequently with individual students. This helped me to confer with them about their work. It also allowed me to guide them into improving their work and evaluate them. By the end of the essay unit, I really felt like I knew the kids' writing inside and out. When the students were publishing their final essay pieces, they wanted to Google to download some pictures into their essays. I was not comfortable with them doing so and made the mere suggestion that they perhaps reenact their scene or take a picture for their scene. They then worked together as peers and were able to figure out how to copy those pictures into their essays. This is important to me as a teacher because when I plan, I want to make sure that as an educator, I am stepping back and I am giving the children room and space to be able to grow and problem solve on their own, more with my guidance as opposed to direct instruction. This experience also led to further learning by incorporating writing and media. and just made for a wonderful classroom community and learning environment. I also use technology to help connect what the students were learning to real world experiences. So, for example, when the students were reading biographies, I created links for them and put them in their iPads that they could access after reading about their subject. They could click on the link, and this example is showing a recording of Eugenie Clark, who was a subject of the Shark Lady. The students were able to see an interview of her and again make further connections to actually see that she is a real person. And just they became more motivated about their learning and their reading. My goal is to always be planned a week in advance. And before I leave on a Thursday or Friday, I try very hard to make sure all the copies that I need are copied, and I put it in a binder that is categorized Monday through Friday. So everything goes into the proper day, and I should be hopefully ready to go for the next week. After our technology experience, I realized that I needed to step back as an educator and make sure that my planning was balanced and that I was allowing the children more time to learn based on inquiry and discovery. I think it's too easy for teachers to stand there and preach to the students and tell them what we want them to learn. However, it is certainly not as beneficial to the kids. So today we are doing author's purpose.
It will also
And they
tell
read
us
a lot
if
of-
it's I forget what it's called, an article, I think, or an article or a story.
They read a lot of old pieces from the New York State test, and I'm prompting them with questions about things they're noticing about the directions or about how the words and the directions might help them. And in doing this, it creates a lot of good discussions about what they're learning.
See, let's look at a book. Maybe we can. No, I think that's all. Then somebody.
Just to note that this lesson was not originally designed to be taught this way, but after I had thought about it, I had wanted the children to be more engaged, and I feel the process was definitely much more beneficial than the way I had originally planned to teach it. One of the things I do in my plan book after a lesson is I try to take notes on anything that I made changes to on the fly. Sometimes I think of things that I know will work better right as I'm going through the lesson, depending on the kids' reactions. And I just take it and write a note in there. For example, this math lesson, I'm going to extend to 2 days. And my justification for this is that they are having to learn a lot of different characteristics of shapes, and it's very hard for them to keep track of. So I know this is probably hard to read, sorry. So we did a lot of note-taking and using our old everyday math templates to make these shapes and write down the characteristics of the shapes. This was not actually in the new plan, or not something I planned for, but something that I felt was valuable to them. So I write it down, and I'll make the notes on my computer. So when I go to plan next year, it'll be there. An important part of planning is understanding where the kids are at. So that's where our assessments come in. I do use some of the district assessments. I find the end of unit test valuable in math. There are Fountas and Pinnell records to plan for reading groups. And I will structure the planning based on different needs, so the groupings could be flexible. So some kids might need help with fluency. Some might need help with rate or comprehension. And the groups can change and interchange a lot depending on what the focus is. I also create my own assessments for the content areas such as science and social studies. I base the assessments on the standards that I find on New York Learns for the district and the state. I have changed the assessments over the years to reflect what the new Common Core learning standards are. So for example, I used to create a test that included multiple choice, true and false, fill in the blank. And because of the new testing, I have reformatted my tests so they are all multiple choice and short answer and extended response. I will also ask them to include some nonfiction writing skills, such as completing charts or diagrams, to be able to exhibit their learning in different ways. All of the content and the skills and vocabulary that are on the test come directly from New York Learns. And of course, everything on the test, the children learned in the classroom through mostly reading, video, writing, and other sources, such as books that we take out of the library, as I showed earlier on in the video. For the writing section of the test, I'm already thinking ahead to next year in that perhaps instead of having them memorize the content and then write about it, I will give them a passage that is related to the content, and they will read the passage and then write about what they're learning. Again, trying to make everything related to what the expectations are for the Common Core learning standards. What you see now is an example of a diagram that they are going to have to complete and fill out on the test. Another element that I like to include on the test, especially for physical science, is testing the children's ability to do a hands-on experiment. Though I understand that most of the information needs to come for their reading, that in fourth grade they need to do some hands-on science for their state testing. So this is something that I try to include to get them used to that. Due to the fact that this is the first year of testing for the third graders, what I do for the children is send a study guide home with them a week prior to the test. This helps the parents and the children work together to narrow the focus of what they need to learn. For students who are in need of extra academic intervention, or for students who do not receive a lot of support at home, I will actually send this particular study guide home right when the unit starts. This gives these kids a lot of extra time to read and prepare for the end of the unit test. With this, I also send other supplementary materials such as vocabulary and smaller trade books that are related to the content. This is an assessment tool that I use for writing in the narrative, essay, and informational pieces. I use this tool also as a checklist, or the students do, during writing. On this rubric, the students are also able to assess themselves based on their final product, and all of the elements are third grade expectations for each genre. On the back of the rubric is a note to parents explaining the learning process and the elements that we covered. It also has successes for each child, and it has suggested goals for each child based on their final product and process. At the risk of being brutally honest, this has been a difficult tool to keep up with because of the district checklists and pre and post assessments we've had to do in writing this year. And unfortunately, I actually value what I have done with this tool over the district assessments because it actually gets in the hands of kids and parents, which is much better feedback than it being filed in a folder. In an effort to come full circle, planning always starts with the students. It starts with getting to know the children as individuals, getting to know what their home lives are like, and understanding what their background and experiences are. Developing a positive rapport with children is an essential part of planning. I believe I'm a much more effective teacher when I have a great deal of knowledge about the children and the families. So the communication piece is very important, which I accomplish through emails, impromptu conferences, and phone calls. This knowledge only adds to the tools that I need to give the students the best education possible.
Hi We hope you learned a lot about how I plan and prepare in the classroom for our children today and for the children of our future. Say hi, Mr. Muscatine. Say cheese.